welcome back. This video is going to be a training video on how to set up fish networking within visual scripting. That's pretty straightforward and actually really simple once you understand how it all works. I think that's probably the biggest hurdle for most folks. So to begin, what we're going to do is we're going to download the Fishnet package. Out here on the Fishnet GitHub, you can see over here on the right there are releases. We're going to go over here and grab the latest release. I tend to stay away from the experimental. That's your choice if you want to play games with that or not. But these are always very reliable. And if you have any problems, you can get a hold of the Fishnet folks over on their Discord. And I recommend you join that if you need any specific help with coding on Fishnet. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and download this package. Now I've already downloaded it here, and what we're going to do is we're just going to double click on that. It'll pop up, and I've already got Fishnet installed, and all you do is click down here on import, and once that's done, it's going to be imported into your project, and you're all set for Fishnet. That's the install. It's real straightforward and simple. Now on the visual scripting side, we have to add a couple of things to our visual scripting options down here under project settings. The first is going to be that we need to add the Fishnet to the node library. So here we have Fishnet runtime. We're going to add that down here as a new entry. Okay, and then after we add that, we're going to come down here into our types, and we're going to add 4 different types that we need to have. So we need the network objects, and that's all your client side. It gives you all the nodes for the client side stuff. Server object is for the server side. Property info and type, we need those 2 because I use reflection when I'm getting my variables, and I'll go into depth on how that works and why I have to do it that way. It's a visual scripting kind of thing, so unless you're an actual programmer and can work around that, that's kind of what we're going to have to do. So once you do that, you hit your regenerate nodes, and then you are installed and ready to go. Now for another install that's unrelated to fish networking, we're going to install Parallel Sync. What this allows you to do is open multiple instances of Unity. So if you have a multiplayer game and you're wanting to test it on the same PC, you're going to have multiple clients. This will allow you to spawn up as many as your machine will run, and then you can run as many players as you need to play and in your testing. So what we're going to do is we're going to come out to their website on their GitHub. Okay, over on the right again we have the releases. 1.5.1 is the version I'm using. Same thing as before. You're just going to download the package, double click on it, run it, and then up here at the top you're going to see a new option, Parallel Sync, and in the clone manager there'll be a create a clone, and then once it's created the clone, it's going to open in a new editor. So this can take up a lot of space if you have a very large project, so kind of pay attention to the space on your drive. You don't want to get in any trouble with that. So once that's installed, you're all set, and we can get started on the multiplayer side of this. All right, so getting started on this part, so what we're going to want to do is under the Fishnet folder, there's examples, a prefabs, and there's a network manager. Just go ahead and drag that network manager in here. Actually, let me just go ahead and drag that in. I'm going to add a component to it. So here we just have the basic manager, the observer. The observers are the conditions that will be met, such as distance or scene or whatever, to cull values, objects that don't belong in a player's vision, right? So if you have a player that is 100 units away from another object in the game, you don't want it to show anything past that, then it will cull everything outside those bounds. And that greatly reduces the amount of network traffic that you have. So it's important to remember these observers need to be on everything. the lower your network traffic, the more objects you can have, the more players you can have, the larger the scale that you can go. So next we have a player spawner. This player spawner we'll have to create a player for, but first let's add a time manager. Okay, so this time manager determines the tick rate and how fast you're going to update your multiplayer game. So really slow would be a very, very slow, maybe like a card time kind of game where you don't have any movement. You're just sending a ready or not, whatever it may be. Super fast would be the Call of Duty type games where you're shooting bullets at each other constantly. And then we have physics. I always set the time manager needs to manage that for physics. Unity has its own, but Time Manager does a really, really good job of managing physics for the fish networked objects. So it's pretty important that you click that. So what we're going to do next is we need to get a player prefab. So we're going to come in here and we're going to create a sprite, and we're just going to give it a circle. It's just a regular circle here on the screen. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a transform to it. So there's a network transform. Okay, this network transform syncs the object between the server and the clients across all clients. So what you see on here is what you're going to see on the client and on the server. So in here we have a couple of things. We have things with an asterisk, and those are paid options. So I haven't found a need for them myself, but everybody else is more than welcome to absolutely go and donate to these folks to get these extra features. They are most likely pretty handy, and it's good to support the folks that are creating content like this, because this is by far one of the best and simplest multiplayer setups I've ever seen. And I've worked with Pun2, Mirror, and then a couple of the others, and even Unity's new one, and these are all. This is really, really good. I mean, very, very good. So let's go on to the interpolation. This is going to be the smoothing of how things look when you're playing. So you'll kind of adjust these. You'll get a hang for this. So if your timing is really slow and you end up with jittery movement, you'll interpolate it and it will smooth it out and make it look nice. So it's kind of one of those per person type deals. So next we have client authority. So this authority is absolutely critical to your game. You want to make sure your server is server authoritative at all times. If you don't have it to where the server is the authority, players will be able to set their own positions. You don't want to do that unless it's for specific things under specific circumstances. So if you have a player that you want to move around, that would be okay, but you need to put in checks to make sure the player can't move further than should be allowed, right? So if you have a player that has a max speed of 4 and you know the distance you can only travel per second is 4, have the server checking that position. So every once in a while do a sampling of all the players and make sure that they're not going at 100 speed. And if they are, disconnect them and ban them, because you don't want cheaters. Cheaters are bad. They will destroy your game really, really quickly as soon as people realize that it's unfair. So client authoritative is only for movement and things like that. For your player, for an object that's going to be fired at an enemy, a bullet or something like that, you would want to have it as server authoritative. Then the server is managing the movement and the player has no control whatsoever where that object ends up. Okay, it's very important. So we have the synchronization. These are just the types of data that's going to be sent. If you're not using it, go ahead and turn it off. If you're in a 2D game and you're not doing any scaling, go ahead and turn it off. Just reduce the overhead on the network. And it's not like it really matters a whole lot, but it's just best practice to turn things on and off if you don't use them. So And then down here we have the network object. The network object is going to be on any object that's going to be over the network. You have to have a network object, and then that object will be on the network. You don't have to have a transform unless it's going to be moving. So if I have a million trees, well, not a million, let's say 50,000 trees, each one would have a network object on them. And then I can then send and receive data between those trees on the network. So if I'm chopping down a tree or it has hit points or whatever, I can send and receive data for that specific tree based on its networked object ID, and then you're editing that data back and forth. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go over to my Parallel Sync, and we're going to go ahead and run this. This is the clone of the project. You can see clone _ 0. This is the 0 instance of my project. So I'm going to go ahead and run it. Everything in this project is identical to my other project. So when I run this and I hit client, you see here's the server object and here's my object. So this is me, I think. Let's take a look. So if I take this guy and I move him, over here, yep. So here's this guy, and if I take this guy here and I move him over here, now we're synced between the two projects. So everything's identical between those two projects, and now we know the networking is working, the transforms are working, so Fishnet is working as expected. We're not having any trouble with it. There's no errors, no warnings, nothing like that. Now that we have the transform working, and that's very, very simple, very straightforward. That's just the position on how to move things around between the client and the server. What we have to do next is we have to do the RPC and the CMDs. So you have the remote procedure calls and the commands. Okay, so the remote procedure, the RPC, is going to be on the server only. We've got to remember that. It will get you very confused if you're trying to send RPCs from the client and it's not working, and it's very frustrating if you don't pay attention to what you're doing. So the RPC is server only, okay, and then the command is what the clients send to the server. Now the server can send both commands and RPCs because it is both. We got to remember that the server and client are both at all times. Now, a client is a client, but the server is both. It runs both as a server and a client. So this script will be provided down below. You'll be able to just copy paste it, create the script. I just called mine Fish CMD RPC. And to get these, I just type RPC master or CMD master, and then we add those nodes. So once we have this understanding of how this RPC stuff works, so over here we have what are going to be the sync variables, and this is all I'm going to cover is sync variables because I don't do the sync dictionaries and sync lists. I've had a lot of trouble with those in visual scripting. It's just it's the way VS does things that it causes problems. So that's what I did here with these arrays, that I'm just sending arrays of everything, and it's basically, it's good enough for me, and it'll be good enough for you. Trust me, it works really, really well. No matter how fast you want to send data, it's available. So you can send at update speeds if you wanted to. I mean, not recommended, but you could do that if you want to. It's that fast. It's very, very, very quick. So what we're looking at here, these are the SyncVars, and these are what will be synchronized between every client and the server. Okay, so when it changes on the server, it will change on every single client. Okay, and this is the way it has to be set up. I got stuck originally because I didn't know how to set all this stuff up, and now this is the final solution I came up with, and it works fantastic. It is really, really powerful in how this is set up. So I really enjoy this method of doing it. So what we're going to do is we're going to have the serialized field, the SyncVar, and that's telling it that this is a SyncVar. Okay, and then I give it a prefix of something, and then string. So this way, when I type in entity string, I'm not getting the other nodes that are string, if that makes sense. So I usually prefix everything, inventory, whatever, or, player, whatever. So you always prefix them so you don't get your nodes all out of whack, because it's easy in NVS to get way too many nodes going. So in here, I've just done a couple samplings of the different types of data. So you got string, int, float, vector2, vector3, and then color. So you can send all that type of data, and you can have it sync between all the players. And now that I have that set up, I want to add a script machine. I pre-made a script, and I want to take a look at how this works. So I'm going to go over how the variables get set, and then you get variables. And then I also want to go over how each of the RPC and CMDs work. Okay, so let's begin here. So this is where the type and the property info nodes came in. The way I do the variables is through reflection, because people will tell you it's pretty slow. It's pretty slow. I don't ascribe to that. I think that it's just fine. You're not going to have any problems. This is visual scripting. I mean, it's already slow enough. You're not going to notice, trust me. It just makes no difference. So what you're going to do here is, if I run this, I now have this script attached to my player. What it does is, for each of the variables that I have on my player, it's going to return the value. So in the reflection, I'm getting the component of this demo vars script. I get the type of the script, I get the property, which is the name of the variable, and these are the name of the variables, and then I get the value. Okay, so when I come in here and I run this, I can hit 1, and down here in my debug, I see that I have all the values returned from whatever it was, right? So if I come back in here and I can do this again, 1, oops, wrong one, right? So now we have this 1, 2, 3. I got 3 1, 2, 3s, a 1, and then okay. So you see how that works. This gets all those values out of all those variables. Otherwise, you're creating something like this. Okay, so this is the alternative, and I do this periodically. I don't necessarily need to have reflection for everything. Sometimes you can just get the variables. You can come back and say, okay, I need to get just entity string. If I hit 3, I get the exact same thing. It's a per variable get, right? So it's just like setting and getting any other variable. And over here, I have the same type of deal for setting the variables. Okay, so over here, see test setting 0. If I change this to whatever 0.434, okay, so we hit 3 again. Right, so now not only is it setting it here, it's setting it on all the clients as well. And that's important to remember, is what you set on the server, it sets everywhere. It doesn't set it just here, it sets it everywhere. So let's move down to this one here. This is the same as this, except for I've added the set variable and a custom event on how it gets the value. So what I'm doing here is if I hit the number 2, okay, I have a value coming into this trigger. This trigger says, okay, I want entity int, and I want 100 also going along with it. So coming in through this custom event, we're doing all the same thing where we're getting the value. I am adding 100 to that value every time it comes through. We have to round it because visual scripting is quite annoying with some types, and it doesn't recognize an int as an int. It's a different type of int. So then we set the value, and as you can see, as I'm running it, I'm increasing by 100 every time I run it. Now the power behind this little graph right here, you can send a variable name and the value to this one flow and update every single variable with this one little script. You don't have to have a huge array of sets. It's going to automatically say, hey, okay, I'm going to send, I want entity int 100, come in and add. So you can do any number of things with this, hit points, mana, whatever, bullets, counts, all that stuff can all be sent to this one flow and it updates everything. And the power behind that is just incredible because you don't have to create multiple scripts or anything like that.
All right, so building on this, now we've seen how we get the variables and set variables, and this is done locally, okay? Now, this would be a server-side function right here because there is no command telling the server to do anything. It's just the server saying, hey, this is internal, send me back and forth, because there was no CMD sent. The client had no interaction with it. It just sent values to the client from the server. So let's do an example of how to send from the client to the server, and we'll go from there. All right, so what we're going to do is on key. So when I hit the space bar, I need to find out, do I own this object? So I'm going to do is owner. Okay, is this network object, am I the owner of this object? Because what happens is if you have 100, even 1,000 players in this list of players, it's going to run this command on every single one of them. So you have to make sure that only your object, the one that you control and you own, is going to run. Okay, because you don't want to send everybody else's data because you can't. You don't own them. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a CMD master. Okay, and so here are my RPC and CMDs. These are from that script. And an important thing on this is you can change these however you want. You can set them up however you want. This is just the way I've done it because I found this was the easiest possible way for me to send and receive data. I originally had those 15 or so scripts, and it was a nightmare trying to figure out which one to use and remembering how the custom events worked, the numbering on the custom events and things like that. It was just terrible. So now it's all one consistent setup. It works great. Have no problems. The only thing that people need to pay attention to is here's the vector 2s. If you're doing a 3D game, you're going to need vector 3. So just change that to a 3, save it out, and you're good to go. It's just I do 2D, so I have no need for the vector 3s that I'm doing anything with vector 3. So just keep that in mind. You can modify these, do anything you want. So back here. So what we're looking at here is this command is going to send to the server. Okay, so when I hit the space bar, are you my object true? Is the only one that's going to send is my object. That's it. The other one's not going anywhere. We're going to call this test, and then I connect nulls to everything else that I'm not sending. So in this case, let's just send a string. Okay, let's send a string. And the way I do this is I just do a create list. Okay, and it depends on how many things, and I do it like this because it's very flexible, right? So I can send an array or just a single item just by create a string literal. I can send a single or an entire list of thousands of objects. It doesn't really matter. It's very flexible, and that makes it very handy not to have 2 different nodes to handle 2 different data types. You don't want to really get your nodes all in a mess. It really sucks sometimes. So let's just do, hey, this works. Okay, all right. So everything else is null. The return trigger, you don't have to worry about that one. That's something I set up for myself. If there was a cascading event, and that's just something that I deal with, it may not be needed for you at all. So you go ahead and modify your script however. Okay, so when I hit the space bar, am I the owner, true or false? And if it's true, I'm going to send, hey, this works to the server. Now the server is going to get that custom event, and we're going to say you're the server, and I have 8 values coming back out of this. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, and then I need the fourth one up. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to get item. Okay, but the first thing I need to do is I need to make sure that this is the server, because the server is the only place that this is allowed to run. If I try to run this on the client, we don't want that to happen ever. That would not be in our interest to have it running on the client. We don't want that there. So what we're going to do is we're going to set entity string, okay, and just like this. And I'm going to take this, and right here, and we have space. We've got the owner. We're going to send the nulls because we don't have anything else to send. Hey, this works. And I've got a couple here and there that have every single one of these used. It just depends on how your data works. Sometimes you'll use one, sometimes you'll use two, sometimes you use them all. I mean, it just depends on how your project's set up and what you're doing. So if I come in here and I hit the space bar, okay, now on the server, it's going to run here on the command because I am the player on the servers. Remember, the client and the server are both the same thing. If I go over here, it did not run because it's not going to send that out and say, hey, because you're not the owner of this object. The other client that's currently open in the other parallel sync is the client. So it won't run here, and it won't run here because it's got nothing to run. So here we came through, hey, this works. Okay, now if I come back over here and I look at, this has not updated. Let me update this real quick, actually. Let me file save. Let me rerun this to make sure that we're synced up. Because if we're not synced, it's not going to work right and it's not going to look right. All right, let's go here. My object. Okay, again, I can run the space bar. Okay, hey, this works. And if I come back over to here, oops, I turn my client and my server into my client. All right, so what we're going to do here is my object. Now, I can run here. This is the client, okay, and I'm going to hit the space bar. Okay, now nothing happens here because this is on the server side. Okay, you got to remember, it just sent this command over the internet or the network, wherever it went, and it is now, it is now back over to here. Okay, so it says, hey, this works. So if we come back over here and change this to something else, it's like sent, and then I hit spacebar. It changed the entity string to sent. Okay, remember, this is on the client side. Okay, now the client cannot change these values. It's not possible for that to happen without setting it up as a hook, and I'm not doing that. So we come back over here, we say object was sent. So on the server side, it all worked. So that is how simple it is to send a CMD back to the server to get the value set and do anything else you need to do to the data. Now let's move on to the RPC. The RPC is going to work the exact same way. And a lot of this is going to be a trial and error for each individual person on learning how this all works. You just remember the RPC comes from the server to all the clients. The command comes from the client to the server. So in some cases, you may have a command, it does something on the server, and then an RPC, and then it does something on the client. So you chain them together in series to do whatever it may be, because something may have to be returned that's not a SyncVar. It could be any number of things. You could instantiate an object or any number of things like that. So let's do an example of an RPC master. We're going to do the master. We're going to RPC. Okay, and then on key import. Oop, forgot we got to do is server, because this has to be on the server only. You cannot run it on the client.
So let's just do null. And we don't have to test any of this. We already know that it's going to send whatever it's going to send. This is identical. It's just the reverse. Okay. We don't need to go through and do any more steps to look at it, because what's going to happen is it's going to be the exact same thing. I can just take this and say down here, boop, and then do whatever, right? So I can just say, well, we're just going to debug it to the string, whatever you want, and then it will say it on the client. Any number of things that you can think of. So it's very, very straightforward, very simple. The RPC is just the reverse of the command, and the command is the reverse of the RPC. The only thing to really pay attention to is who owns what objects when you're sending out RPCs. That is the most important thing to remember, that if you're targeting one specific object, you need to make sure, am I the owner of this object or not? It's very important. Okay, so the RPC and the CMDs, that's all there is to it. It's very straightforward. You're just sending data back and forth and doing whatever else and sending events to cause actions to happen on the client. So if you have a flow that needs to run somewhere, and you may not have to have anything attached here at all, this may actually just trigger a world event or an animation or anything. It could be any number of things. So it's up to you in figuring out how you want to use that. It's very, very handy. And once you get all this stuff right here down, the core concepts down, you're going to be just ripping and roaring real quick. It's really simple. The last thing I'm going to cover in this video is how to instantiate networked objects. It's very straightforward, very simple. Everybody, gets worked up about all this networking stuff, but it's really probably one of the easiest things you'll ever do once you figure it out. So instantiate, just like you would any other object. So what I want to do is I want to create a new object, and I want to make let's do a square since my others are circles. Let's do a network transform and add that to that. And then I need to add a network object. Let's say network object. So we have our transform and our object. And this time we're going to make sure that only the server can manage the movement on this. Remember this authority. The authority is very important, that we only make sure certain things work in certain places. So now I've created this. What I need to do is I need to stop. And up here at the top is the fish networking. There's a refresh default prefabs. These prefabs down here, you say we found 7 prefabs, and it's going to go through all the folders. And some of the other networking options out there that you have to go and manually do them. You have to add them to the list. In this case, you don't. You just have to refresh that and then save. Let me run this. Come back over here. All right, we're going to rerun this. And on our server here, let's get back over here on server. Let's fire up the server. Okay, here's my object, which is just a little old circle. I'm going to put my server in the top right, my player in the top left. So this is the client. Okay, so we're going to go back over here, and we're going to instantiate a couple of these squares. Now, one thing to remember is only the server can instantiate. The client cannot instantiate. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to do is server, and this is true. Okay, so one other thing we need to remember is right now my script is on my player. So each one of these has this script. So if I ran this with just is server, both of them are going to instantiate a clone. So in this case, I want to do is owner, because I only want my server player, which is the master player and is the server, to be able to actually run this, because I don't want the other clones to fire off extras. I just want the one that I wanted to create. So on keyboard, so let's take this to F1. And once I hit F1, it's just going to spawn one. But
first we have to spawn it. So we're going to this to the game object. Okay, and so what this network spawn is going to do, it's going to have fish spawn the object across the network for all the other players. So we need to get the network connection. So we're going to get the local network connection for this object. We end up with this. So if we come over here, we hit F1, right? So we're going to come over here, we spawned a square, and this is on the server side that it spawned it. And we come back over here, and now we see that the same square has been applied here. Okay, so this is how you will spawn all your objects. Now, it didn't run here, nothing ran on the server. It just spawned the object across the network. So that's about it for this video. It's very straightforward in how all this works. Um, you're sending and receiving messages to and from the server. The variables are going to be a big part of what you do, creating SyncVars to make sure that all the data integrity is the same between all objects. Okay, once you set it on the server, it's going to be set on the client. I don't think I've never seen it not set. It's got 100% rate so far. It's never missed any. And for most common things you're going to be doing, it's going to involve either sending a command from the client to the server, and the server is going to do something and set a value somewhere, or the server is going to tell everybody, hey, this just happened, so start this, right? So it could be rain, or it could be day-night cycle. Okay, so the server would send an RPC out and say, hey, day-night just started, start the timers, and then count down to lerp the nighttime into day or day into night, whatever. It could be any infinite number of things. But it's all about controlling the flow of data and going back and forth and using these variables to your advantage, because these variables, since they're sent to all the clients, you don't have to do anything other than set them on the server, and then the clients can do whatever they need to do. You could even have things on update on the client waiting for variables to change. If they're often changed, you could do updates, you can do triggers, any number of things. So it's completely up to you. I'll follow up this video probably with another couple videos. I want to probably start making more videos. My channel's kind of, I don't know, it's been 7 months, I guess, or more, 6 months. I don't know, however long since I made another video. So let's make more. I think that'd be good. All right, thanks guys. Have a good one.